Hello. Hi everyone. Thank you for coming. We're gonna get started really soon. It's great to see all your faces. Let me know in the comments whether you're here from the Climate and Colour community or whether you're here from the Climate Earth community. Okay, Joyce is here. So hopefully she'll be joining us in a minute. Someone says, how am I? I'm really good, thank you. Tired, but good and really excited for this conversation. I hope everyone out there is also having a restful day. I'm the UK, so it's the evening now. But yeah, wherever you are watching this from and whatever time it is, wherever you are, I hope you're doing well. And yeah, today our conversation is going to be with Joyce from Client Earth. And yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation and share with you the work that they do, because it is really amazing. And the work that Joyce is doing is really amazing as well. So hopefully she is able to get in. Let me just check. Okay, let me just try again. Thank you. Oh, there we go. Hi.
About that, I realized that I didn't have Instagram didn't have access to my microphone and camera. So
Oh, no worries. Well, at least you're here now. Thank you for being here.
thank
And
you for
yeah,
having me. I'm really delighted to be part of this conversation.
yeah, I'm really excited to get into it. I was just saying to everyone that I'm really excited to, get into this conversation and start sharing what you're working on, you personally, but also Client Earth as well. So, yeah, without further ado, I'm going to jump right into the conversation. So, hello everyone. I'm the founder of Climate and Colour, and I'm currently pursuing a PhD at Cambridge, looking at applying AI to climate change issues. And within that, looking at centering Indigenous knowledge systems, and yeah, marginalized community voices. And I'm so excited to be joined today by Joyce Meklar-Tan. And she works at Client Earth, as I've already said, and Client Earth is a environmental law charity, and they use a variety of tools, which I'm sure we'll get into, across the life cycle of the law to change the system and make it more sustainable. And also they do a lot of work in the environmental racism realm. So yeah, we're going to dive into all of that good stuff. But I'm going to first just pass over to Joyce, who will give us some more detail on exactly what Client Earth is and what they do, and the work that she and the wider Client Earth team are doing to highlight and dismantle systemic environmental racism from an industry perspective. So yeah, Joyce, go ahead.
Great, thanks, Joycelyn. And before I begin, I really love your name, by the way.
Yeah.
I must confess that this is my first time ever to join an Instagram live event. So if I experience some technical difficulties, please bear with me. But I'm really excited that my first time is with you and with the Climate and Color community. So to everyone who's tuned in, a warm hello from London. So as Joycelyn mentioned, my name is Joyce and I'm a lawyer at the Asia Climate and Energy team at Client Earth. So we use the power of the law to push for systemic change so that we bring about our vision of people and planet thriving together. So, Joycelyn, you mentioned that we work across the life cycle of the law.
Yeah.
And what that means really is that first we help shape the law so that it's sufficiently robust and contains enough mechanisms so that it can fulfill its purpose of protecting the environment and rights. And then second, we work to monitor the enforcement of laws that already exist so that whenever we find that these laws have been broken, we look for the people responsible and hold them to account. So that means that we could, for example, be suing corporations or even countries when they fail to comply with laws and regulations. And then third, we also work to increase access to environmental justice. So that means when people suffer environmental harms, they know that they have somewhere to go to have these redressed. So that includes, for example, making sure that there are courts or other government agencies that are able to hear their claims for damages, and they have the authority to award compensation for their redress of rights violations. And that also means that people are able to access these courts without it being too expensive so that they're turned off, and so therefore that ability to access the courts become useless. And it works in a cycle so that we then learn from our experiences in engaging these different stages, and we try to improve recommendations to further strengthen the laws so that over time they become better and better at protecting the environment and also rights. And so we work across a whole range of environmental challenges. So these include the biggest global challenges that define our modern times, such as climate change and biodiversity loss and plastic pollution, to those that are felt most acutely at the community level, such as air pollution. And the way that we approach our work is really that we engage very closely with scientists, economists, and other experts so that whenever we bring policy recommendations or we take somebody to court, our arguments are always backed by science and by data. And my team in particular focuses on climate and energy, and specifically the Asian region.
Yeah.
So if, for example, I were to summarize the work of our team in one sentence, I would say it that we work with civil society and governments to help Asia transition towards sustainable energy systems.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that intro. And to anyone listening, I mean, I hope you're just as blown away as I am, because law seems like this, a lot of the time it seems like this sort of far away, quite, lawyers usually seen as people who are on the wrong side of the law sometimes. And it's just amazing to hear about this work. I'm actually quickly going to move because I realized that my phone is about to run out of charge. So let me just resituate and then I'll carry on the conversation. Bear with me, everyone. Okay, great. So yeah, I would like to dive in. You were talking about your role specifically with in the Asia region. I'd love to dive into like why specifically like Client Earth has picked out the Asia region as a place to focus on, and yeah, why so much effort is going on there for the rest of the community to sort of get a better idea of Asia's positioning in the climate, in the future of climate.
Yeah, sure, definitely. So I just like to emphasize three reasons why we find it important to focus on Asia. And the first one is that a lot of the economic growth is projected to happen the most and the fastest in the Asian region. And sadly, the way that this economic growth is projected is that it's supposed to be highly reliant on fossil fuels, which, as the CIC community knows very well, is a huge driver of global warming and climate change.
Mm.
And so we need to find a way to make sure that this development happens within planetary boundaries and does not result in the world spiraling deeper and deeper into the climate crisis. The second reason is that 60% of the world's population currently resides in Asia. And again, based on global trends, that means that the more people there are, the higher demand there is for energy. And so again, we want to make sure that being able to meet the people's right to access basic energy services does not mean the end for a lot of species of plants and animals, or even the lives of many people across the world. And third, and one of the most important and exciting reasons, is that most of the world's youth actually live in Asia. And along with the future generations, we know that the youth are going to be the ones who will live the longest with the decisions that we make today. So it's really important that we engage with them early on while they're still young. And we know that Asia is a very vast and complex region. And so we do recognize that it's a different context. So we approach our work with humility, knowing that the approaches that we've taken in Europe might not necessarily work in the Asian context. But then the exciting thing is that in Asia, there's a huge and dynamic community of people and organizations that are working in the climate and energy space. So we are trying to support and amplify the work that they're doing. And sorry if I'm going to be talking too much, but I
No.
really so one of my favorite aspects of our work is that we're trying to support the development of legal capacity in the region. So we're thinking of setting up collaborations with legal clinics at universities, opening up opportunities for internships and fellowships so that we can support Asian organizations and young lawyers and encourage them to focus on energy and climate and environmental law.
I mean, yeah, it's just so amazing. And it's just like, it's really cool to hear that a company has taken these things into consideration, like from the get. And, like, just so much around the youth and believing and giving space for youth to talk about their dreams for the future. I mean, I discussed this in a post recently, inspired by Shadow Magazine's youth issue. And it's just like youth have such energy and are really driving this climate movement in so many different ways in so many different locations around the world, and being able to empower them in whatever roles they see themselves fitting in this climate movement is so important, because I think many of us know that growing up in school, these things just were not talked about. It's not compulsory still. And so providing those avenues for people who want to work in a more conscious space in a certain industry where that might not seem possible is, yeah, it's just so important. Um, and another thing that you touched on there was energy. And I know that your work at Client Earth sort of touches on both climate and energy, and obviously those are incredibly interlinked. Can you just dive in a little bit more into like how the climate and energy team works at Client Earth, and also the inequalities that you see in this energy space?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, as you said, our climate and energy teams have been working for many years in Europe, and we're trying to bring that work across to Asia in a way that's respectful of the Asian context. So, to talk about our work in the climate space, so I can give two examples. One is that we drive governments and corporations to ensure that they have Paris aligned plans, that they transition to net zero within a time frame that's aligned with the temperature goals of the Paris Agreement. And then we also engage banks and financial institutions to make sure that money is no longer wasted in investments that are subsidizing fossil fuels, cause a climate emergency, and are therefore unlocked and freed up to be used in clean energy investments. And in the energy space, we work to, for example, stop the construction of coal power plants, such as by looking into planning permissions or environmental impact assessments, because they simply have no space anymore in our current world. And then we take a step back as well and look at the broader energy sector as a whole and how it's regulated, so that we point out areas where there are unfair subsidies that are favoring fossil fuel companies, and then try to remove those subsidies so that we can level the playing field and allow renewables to come in and penetrate the energy system. And so these are the kinds of work that we are trying to do in Asia.
Amazing. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah. No,
sorry.
you go.
I just realized that I haven't answered the second part of your question on inequality. And
Yes.
yeah, as you pointed out, climate and energy are very closely interlinked. And I'm sure the CIC community is very much aware of how the global north has historically been responsible for most of the carbon emissions to date. And unfortunately, the worst impacts and the earliest impacts of climate change have been disproportionately seen and suffered by global south communities. And this is reflected as well in the energy space because there are huge disparities between the global north and the global south in terms of their ability to enjoy energy access. So reports from the World Bank, for example, have shown that the 10% richest population uses 20 times as much energy as the poorest 10% of the global population. And really staggering figures like an average person in Iceland uses 81 and a half times more energy than the average person in Bangladesh. And we know that every individual has the right to access energy because this has so many knock-on effects. If you can't access electricity, you can't bring yourself out of poverty, you can't complete schooling, especially in these times of the pandemic, right? And women and children are disproportionately suffering from energy poverty. And these inequalities exist between the global north and the global south, but they also exist even within a particular country. So in the Philippines, for example, where I'm from, there are a lot of communities which still don't have access to electricity. There are some which do have access, but very little. So only maybe 6 hours a day. I remember I used to attend hearings in southern Philippines, and there wouldn't be any electricity. So the court hearings would be held outside in the garden because the courtrooms were pitch black and you couldn't see anything. So these things are happening, and they're also happening even within countries in the global north because indigenous communities are suffering disproportionately from both energy poverty and also disproportionately from climate impacts.
Yeah, and just you talking about the sort of 6 hours a day thing. I remember my family's from Ghana, and I remember whenever we'd go and visit my grandparents, it would just be the norm for the lights to just go out and then come back on, go out and come back on, and go out and come back on, like all the time. And
Mm,
yeah, that's just a normal thing. And I think in a lot of countries that has become some sort of a norm, but it's so disruptive to life, especially as you said, online life.
mm.
Um, so yeah, thank you for telling us a little bit more about like your background and yeah, giving those examples. And most of my audience will already know this, but yeah, the disproportionate impact of the climate emergency is on you know black, black, indigenous, people of color, vulnerable communities, and like there are just so many studies, so many examples of how this is manifested. And you were talking about air pollution before, and obviously we sort of witnessed and heard about the really sad coroner's report late last year, but it was for the 9-year-old Ella, who was from Lewisham, and she died in 2013. And yeah, on her coroner's report, it was air pollution was what killed her. And Lewisham is a area of London, a borough of London that is very, very diverse, and it is just such a pattern to have areas where there are more people of color residing have these just huge amounts, over the standards of the UN, over the standards of WHO, over the standards of EU guidelines of what particulate matter levels we should have. So your work at Client Earth does something to do, as you mentioned before, to tackle environmental racism and issues like this, like
Mhm.
the scenario of Ella, but also the thousands of other examples of environmental racism around the world. And one really interesting case you did was in Australia. Could you go into a little bit more detail about what this case entailed and yeah, how you worked with communities on the ground to get justice?
Yeah, sure. So our climate team, under the leadership of Sophie Marjanac, did support 8 members of the Torres Strait Island communities to bring a complaint before the UN Human Rights Committee on the ground of violations to their rights to life, their rights to culture, and their right to freedom from interference with their privacy and home and family. And that's because the Torres Strait Island the Torres Strait Islands are low-lying islands in Australia, and they have indigenous communities that are living there who are seeing their lands slowly being swept away due to coastal erosion. And we see really heartbreaking examples of people saying that the wells where they used to get fresh water have now become salty, so they can't get drinking water from there anymore. And the lands where their grandparents and their parents used to live, they've slowly been washed away. And so there's a real risk that not even in future generations, but the current generations might not be able to grow old in the lands where their ancestors used to live. And that is a huge concern. And so we supported them bringing a complaint at the UN in order to ask the Australian government to do more to mitigate their emissions, so to be more ambitious with their emissions reductions target, and also to provide resources to allow the Torres Strait Island communities to be able to spend on adaptation so that they can adapt better to the impacts of climate change that are really ravaging their islands. So yeah, this is one way where we as an environmental law charity can support Indigenous communities and hopefully bring justice and really confront these issues of racism that pervade the environmental space.
Yeah. And I think that that case is so sort of iconic, and cases like it are becoming more common. When we talk about reparations, when we talk about, obviously it's a huge topic, can't go into, all the nuance of reparations right now, but holding people accountable is like one of the key things in making sure we actually get the climate action we need. And there are so many stakeholders in that accountability. There are the community members themselves, there are community organizers, and there are lawyers to bring all of this together and hold governments and corporations accountable for the mess that they have got us in. And yeah, just stories like that are things that give us hope for the future, that justice can be given, and that governments should be more fearful of being held to account, because that should happen more often. So we've got 5 more minutes. Before I sort of wrap up, if anyone has any questions that they want to ask Joyce, or they want to ask me, feel free to put them in the question bit or in the comments bit, wherever you want. And don't worry if you can't think of a question right now. You can get in touch with Client Earth at Client Earth on Instagram. And Joyce, where can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your work specifically?
Yeah, sure. So my email is jtan@clientearth.org. And yeah, please feel free to shoot me any questions.
Great.
And yeah, if we have a couple of minutes, perhaps I could talk a little bit more about about the implications of the Torres Strait Island case, for example. And I don't see any questions at the moment. So this is the first human rights-based climate litigation in Australia, and it's also the first case that has been brought by inhabitants of low-lying islands against a nation state. And so we're really hoping that we'll get a strong decision, which would then also recognize that the impacts of climate change and human rights would trigger legal obligations on the part of states to do something. So we're really hopeful that we'll get a favorable decision on this.
And how just for everyone watching, how hard is it? Where does the law lay in order to, implicate governments for these violations? Is it sort of quite obvious in the law that it's a violation, or is the law vague so that it makes your job harder?
So we do see that there are very strong legal bases for the rights that we say. So, for example, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights clearly lays out that the government must respect and promote the people's right to life, their right to culture, and these are obviously really threatened by climate change impacts. And so we're hoping that we will see that clearly recognized. But we do acknowledge that a forthcoming decision from the UN would only be recommendatory. But even if it's just recommendatory, we see that as having a very powerful
Yeah.
political signal to governments, because
Yeah.
they'll be put on notice that these legal obligations will be engaged, and that they really have the commitment they need to make these commitments to ramp up their climate action.
Yeah, for sure. And I
Mhm.
think, yeah, just sending out that message loud and clear definitely needs to happen. And there is a sort of it feels like a lot of countries at the moment are sort of not fussed. They're not scared,
Mhm.
really. They don't feel like they're going to be implicated in any way. And currently, climate policy does seem to be filled with more platitudes than actual action.
Mhm.
So yeah, I really hope that that case goes well and you can get justice for that community. Um,
Yeah, we hope so too.
Before we wrap up, I just wanted to sort of leave on a hopeful and action-driven note. So, um, yeah, what are any of the new sort of disruptive approaches that you are taking in order to bring justice to solutions for the climate emergency? So obviously we've just talked about that new case, but yeah, just to leave us on uh, an example of something that is hopeful going on in this space. Do you have an example for us?
Yeah, sure. Perhaps I can give two. And the first one really arises out of a recognition that in order for us to really combat the climate crisis, we need to get the private sector involved and act decisively. And what we've done in that space is to go and use mainstream corporate law instead of using the traditional tools of environmental law, questioning environmental impact assessments. We we try to engage corporations in a language that they understand very clearly, and that's profit. So
Mm-hmm.
in Poland, for example, we brought a case to question a company that was supporting the construction of what would have been the last new coal-fired power plant in Poland. And we used a profitability argument because we saw really staggering economic reports showing that there was no way this power plant would become profitable and make money without it relying on the government to support it
Right.
by capacity payments. And so that's just decision making that doesn't really scare. So we questioned that, and we were successful in that case, and that meant avoiding emissions, which in coal plant terms would be about 6 million tons of carbon per
Wow.
year. And
Wow.
that, in addition to uh, health,
Yeah.
health costs avoided, all of the illnesses and cardiovascular diseases that would arise because of air pollution coming from coal power plants. And um and in that sense, we didn't use environmental law, we used corporate law, and it
Right.
became really successful. So we're hoping that that sort of disrupts the whole corporate law space and encourages other people to also use these tools in order to address the climate problem. And then I suppose this
Amazing.
one arises out of a recognition that those that stand to suffer the most from climate impacts should be given the loudest voice in
Yeah.
terms of how we should address the problem.
Yeah.
And we're mindful of that in the way that we approach our work in Asia. So we recognize the agency and the powerful voice of Global South actors, and we support them where we can. So, for example, there were a lot of Filipino individuals, civil society organizations that asked the Philippine human rights commission to investigate threats of human rights violations arising out of the business activities of carbon majors or the fossil fuel companies. So our climate team supported that and gave expert evidence to show the trends in climate change litigation and to show the increasing and advancing science that that attributes certain that attributes the climate change to extreme weather events. So, for example, there are already studies showing that climate change has made a certain tropical cyclone 3 times more powerful. So
Yeah.
human impact of the human impact is really clearly shown in extreme weather events.
That's so, so cool. Both of those examples just, yeah, are what it seems like we need in order for just transitions and just change and just solutions. Um, I know we're going over time right now, but there was one question from Declan who says, where there is a blatant breaking of the EU directive by government inaction, how can local activists with a long track record of action engage Client Earth on board? So I guess this is for groups who, yeah, are ready to take someone to court, are ready to take government to court. How do we get in touch with you? How do you take on new cases?
Yeah, sure. So we do work a lot with various individuals and organizations across Europe. So you can reach out to us through our website. It really depends on which area of law you are looking to engage or which kind of environmental problem you want to engage. And you can feel free to email me and I can point you to the right person at Client Earth who might be able to help.
Amazing. Joyce, thank you so much for sharing all of these examples of your work and, yeah, just opening our eyes a little bit more to the law, because I think this isn't something that's spoken about a huge amount in the climate space, and it's a very important part of the climate movement. So thank you for letting us understand better another role in the climate movement, and thank you for, yeah, your amazing work. And it's been really great to talk to you.
Yeah, it's been really great as well. And thank you so much for having me and for all the work that you do. The Climate Explorer community is really amazing. And you being able to have this platform and share these conversations with people who want to be more aware of climate conversations is really, really incredible. So thanks for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining in, everyone. And yeah, hopefully see you soon on the next live. Have a great evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are, and see you soon.